Welcome back to Askewed Reviews. Today we're doing another fan request from Ginger Maximus, and today's movie is the 1986 horror sci-fi comedy Chopping Mall. Here is your trivia question for today. What was the original title this movie was released under? The answer will be at the end of this video. The film takes place in a mall where they've decided to beef up their security by adding three protector robots. Now, supposedly, these robots are non lethal, but we'll see how that goes, as we also have now a set of teenagers or possibly college students that also work at the mall and have decided to have a late night party. Now, unfortunately for these kids, the robots have been struck by lightning and now are no longer going to be doing their civic duty and instead go on a murdering spree. And the worst part of all, the mall is now on a lockdown where they cannot get out. So now it's up to these teenage 20 something adults, maybe, to either survive the night or fight back. When it comes to the mall where the majority of the scenes were filmed, it was done at the Sherman Oaks Galleria in California. In fact, most of the shoots were done after 9 p.m., as the owner wanted the mall to still be able to be functional during the day. This was also not the only movie filmed here, as Fast Times at Ridgemount High, Commando, and Terminator 2 Judgment Day also had scenes that were recorded in this mall. When it comes to the Protector robots, it showcases three in the film, but there were actually five of them created. Most of the parts for the robots actually came from the frameworks of wheelchairs and parts of conveyor belts. Here's another interesting piece of robot trivia for you. The movie Short Circuit, which also came out in 1986, has a very similar origin to the robots in this movie, while this robot was struck by lightning and actually became friendly instead of murderous. By the way, in case you didn't know, all three of the Protector robots are voiced by the director, Jim Wynorski. Jim Wynorski also managed to get some subtle nods into other things he had worked on into this film. For instance, the technician that's reading a book, that book is in fact They Came from Outer Space 12 Classic Science Fiction Tales, which he in fact edited. There's also a poster for a film called Screwballs in the background of one scene, which he happened to be the writer of. And speaking of posters, there's quite a few posters for Roger Corman movies throughout the entire film, who happened to be a producer on this movie and many others. Attack of the Crab Monsters is the movie that Ferdy and Allison are watching on the television, which also happens to be a Roger Corman film. There's even some characters that show up from other Corman productions. For instance, the Blands, which come from the movie Eating Raoul, show up in this movie as the Blands. Dick Miller plays the character of Walter Paisley both in this movie and Corman's movie A Bucket of Blood. The last Roger Corman reference is with the pet shop in the mall called Roger's Little Pet Shop, which of course is a reference to The Little Shop of Horrors from 1960 that was also a Roger Corman production. Also, when talking about references towards store names in this movie, there's the sporting goods store Peckinpah's, which is a reference to the famous director Sam Peckinpah. When it comes to other possible casting choices, there were only a few. For instance, Deborah Blee was originally going to play the character of Linda but had to drop out. Dana Kimmel was originally set to play the character of Allison until she found out that there was going to be some nudity in the film. She ended up dropping out, and then they brought in Kelly Maroney as she had no issue with that. There was a lot of arguments between the writers as to who would be the heroic character to kind of step up, whether it was going to be John Terlesky's Mike or Russell Todd's Rick. Also, speaking of the character Mike, there's a sequence where he says to one of the robots, Klaatu Barada Nikto, which is a famous line from the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still. So, Chopping Mall has the sex and violence of a great 80s horror movie and a body count of 10. And the film definitely has a fan base, as there's been constant rumors since the original that a sequel was going to come out, with Jim Wynorski making it. There was also rumors in 2012 of Robert Hall making a version where it would be supernatural instead of robotic, which I think is weird. And then, of course, the most recent rumors in 2023 is that James Wan is wanting to make a remake, and I would definitely see that. So, all in all, Chopping Mall is a great 80s horror movie. I really enjoyed the film. I felt it had a good story, a lot of great action, and I'm actually going to give it a 4 out of 5. Now, as for the trivia question from the beginning of the video, What was the original title this movie was released under? When the film released in March of 1986, it was called Killbots, and it had this as its cover art. So, since it performed poorly, the producers decided that the title plus the picture might have made it seem a bit more directed towards kids, so they changed the art and they called it Chopping Mall. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Askewed Reviews. If there's a movie you'd like to see get a review, just mention it in the comments. And as always, like, comment, share, and subscribe.